Gentlemen, welcome back to the garage. Today we're out here to do the annual maintenance on our 2012 Scion IQ. Now the owner's manual is frustratingly cryptic regarding what the interval for this actually is, but ultimately it works out to about once a year or every 10,000 miles. We don't drive the car anywhere near that much, so I just do this once a year in November or December, and that's good enough. But if you drive more than we do, you may want to do this every 6 to 9 months. What this mainly boils down to is an engine oil change and a tire rotation. The manual discusses a number of other little items that you should do at the same time, like checking for light bulbs and checking the fluid levels and the tire pressures and that sort of stuff. And you should be keeping on top of that anyway, so I'm not going to address that here, but know that as part of the official annual maintenance cycle, those are included. Our first step in the process today is to drive the car a few miles and get the engine up to temperature to make the oil easier to drain out. So, it never being a bad day to drive your IQ, let's go for a ride. The important thing is to drive the car until the engine gets up to temperature. You don't need to drive it 100 miles or something. Just enough that the low coolant temperature light goes out. Once it's up to temperature, you should be good. So maybe 5 miles or so at the most. Shouldn't take a whole lot. Once you get the engine warmed up, drive the car back into the garage and try to get it out in the center as opposed to on one side as if you were just going to park, so you've got room to work on both sides. Because we're rotating the tires, you're going to need to get all 4 wheels off, and that means you need to have some room to maneuver, and you don't want to be right up against the wall. Next, jack and jack stands. Before you jack the car up, put a block of wood or something under one of the rear tires so it doesn't roll away. I also have the parking brake set, but it's best to err on the side of caution and do something like this just so that it doesn't roll backwards off of the jack. Then, jack up the front end of the car. There's a spot right in the center, a little nipple that sticks out of the under tray, or the subframe. That is the spot you put the jack. Put the jack under there. Start lifting. Once you get the car lifted up with the jack, slide your jack stand under there. I got it way higher than I needed to, but you want to put it up under this subframe. If you look at this suspension member, right under there is a good spot for it. Do the same on the other side, and then slowly lower the car onto the jack stand. According to the service manual, this tow hook, where is it? There, is the jack point for the rear of the car. This is actually over on the passenger side, but you just jack the whole back end of the car up from that, and this car is stiff enough that you don't have to worry about it bending or anything. In order to do this procedure, you only need to get the car high enough to get the rear wheel off of the ground and to get a jack stand under it. These jack stands are adjustable, so I can lower this a couple of notches, and there we go. This right here is where you put the jack stand. Not here, not anywhere else. Right there. And one on the other side, like that. If you're anything like me, you only have to put oil in this engine once a year when you change it. I never have to add oil to this because mine doesn't consume oil. Apparently this engine is notorious for doing that, but mine doesn't, so I never add oil. As a result, all the heat cycles that it goes through from being driven for a year tighten this down pretty good. And I cheated a second ago and I tried to remove this and I couldn't with my hand. So if that's your situation, get you a paper towel and some channel locks. Get the paper towel around the handle part of the cap. Use the channel locks to give it a twist. You shouldn't have to crush the life out of it. Just use them to get you a little bit more leverage, and it ought to break loose pretty easy. See, now we've got this loose. The reason we want to do this first is, if this gets stuck on the valve cover, then you may risk damaging it trying to remove it once you've already drained the oil out. So you want to make sure you have this off first, just in case you needed to drive the car somewhere to have somebody else deal with the valve cover or something else. I have once again pulled a stupid and put the jack stand in just the right spot so that I can't get my drain pan under it. If you've seen my video on changing the transmission fluid in this car, I did exactly the same thing in that video. So we need to remove that jack stand there, forward about 6 inches or so that we can get a drain pan under it, because that's exactly where the drain plug is. So in order to do that, we're going to lift the front of the car up just enough that it's not resting on the jack stand. And then move our jack stand kind of up to here. And now we've got enough space to get the pan under. Maybe back the jack off just a hair. Next thing I'm going to do is remove this wheel. I mentioned that we're going to rotate the tires, and so at some point we have to remove all 4 wheels. But in order to get access to our drain plug and the oil filter, the easiest way to do that is right through here where this wheel is in the way. So we're going to go ahead and remove this. There are 2 wheel options on the IQ. I have the base model that has these plastic wheel covers, but there's also a version with alloy wheels. And if you have the alloy wheels, you can go straight to the process of removing them by removing the lug nuts with a lug nut socket. But because I have the base model, I have these plastic covers that I have to remove first. The way you do that is to just pry them off with something like a pry bar. Work it in a few places, give it a twist. Now, it'll feel like you're not accomplishing anything, but eventually you will find a spot where you can get some purchase on it. And once you find one of those spots, get it in there real good, give it a pry, and they come right off. Don't get too ham-fisted or you can crack these. And these are unique to the IQ, and so I'm sure they're expensive and difficult to replace. So work in from the edge, be gentle with your prying, and it'll come off eventually. Next, we've got to remove the wheel. I'm going to use an impact wrench, but if you don't have one, you can remove the wheel covers on the ground and loosen the lug nuts before you jack the car up, and then you'll be able to get these off. And if the wheel is stuck on there, give it a little nudge at the top, and it should break free with no fuss. Then roll your wheel out of the way. With our wheel out of the way, we can slide our drain pan under here, and we want it below our oil filter and the drain plug. Once we got it under there, get in there with a 14mm socket, and a breaker bar or a ratchet handle, and bust the drain plug loose, but don't remove it just yet. You're going to want to make sure that you've got your drain pan aligned to this side of the plug. Then we just turn the plug. And once you get it close to being free, you want to make sure you're holding it in the hole. You'll see that oil starts to drip out of there. Once you've got it loose, move it out of the way in one motion, and your oil will drain out into your drain pan. Yeah, you're going to have oil all over your hand when you do this. There's basically no way to do this without getting oil on yourself. So I like to wear the gloves when I do this these days. But have a rag or something ready to wipe it off anyway, so that you can keep working without it making a mess. With our oil pan draining, we also need to remove and replace our filter. Now, this is the part of this job where if you've never seen one of these Toyotas, you're likely to find yourself thinking, what the heck is this business? This is a several-piece oil filter housing where the filtering element is the only part that gets replaced. And the way that this works is we first have this center cap that we use a 3/8 drive wrench of some sort. There we go. Okay, so we loosen that guy. In your oil filter kit that you had this guy. And what this is a tool that fits into here for the express purpose of draining the oil out of the filter. Our oil filter housing cap has this O-ring here that, well, there it goes, is used to seal the cap on the end of this. And in order to get our drain tool, this guy, to snap in there and drain, you got to remove that O-ring. There we go. What's probably the hardest part of the entire operation is removing the oil filter housing itself. Frankly, much like any oil change, getting the filter off is always the hardest part of the job. In order to get the filter off, we need this guy right here. This is the Toyota factory tool specifically for removing one of these oil filter housings. You can see the part number on it here. I'll put that down in the description as well. So this is a many-sided socket, as you can see, that has a 3/8 drive nut on there. The way I like to do this is I take a 3/8 to 1/2 inch drive adapter, like this, and I put them together like that, and then I get a breaker bar on this. And it may be necessary also to kind of tap this on with a hammer with a piece of paper in between this and the filter housing so that you can really get purchase on that oil filter housing, because it is in there tight. We get our wrench on there with our breaker bar. And I have in the past had to put a jack handle on this to break this loose. But no, this one is just coming loose on its own. Once you get it all the way loose, it drops right out. Here's what our housing looks like outside of the car. I've still got the oil filter socket on there. We've got our filter element kind of stuck in there over this centerpiece. That pulls right out like this. And the way I like to deal with these is I've got this little tool that I made out of a coat hanger that I hang over the edge of my drain pan, and I rest this on it while I'm working to let any oil that's still in this filter element drain out into the pan so I can recycle it later. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in my little tool there. But now you've got your filter housing with an O-ring we got to replace and some old oil in there. So I'm going to go ahead and dump the oil out into the drain pan. And if you drained this well, you shouldn't have to worry about it dripping on the floor. Now we can get on with our process of replacing our O-ring and our filter elements. So we take our old O-ring and we get a pick in there. And it's got this little notch that's super handy to get a pick in. You pull it out over the threads, and then you just pull it out. So our oil filter kit comes with 2 O-rings. We've got a big one and a little one. The little one we'll set aside for now. You may remember that goes in the bottom right here of our filter housing. And then we've got this big one that goes in this groove right here. We take our new O-ring, and I've got oil on my gloves already, so I'm just going to use that to lubricate this, because you don't want to ever install O-rings dry. So we get the oil on there, and it just needs to be oily, not like drenched or anything. And then you stretch it over the threads and get it down into your groove. You get it in there all the way around. And then we turn this guy over. Once again, we oil it up with our oil residue on our gloves. Get it like that. We put it into our O-ring groove down here in the bottom of this. You're gonna kind of have to fight it to get it in there. Then we take our cap, wipe the old oil off the bottom of it, and then go ahead and screw this into the bottom of your filter housing. We're gonna tighten this once we've got it on the car, but we'll go ahead and put this back together so we don't leave any parts out. So we take our new filter element, we stick it in here like this. And now, I think it's prudent to fill these up with oil before you put them back in. Because we've got this together, if we fill this with oil, it shouldn't leak out through the bottom. So let me grab some new oil, and we'll fill this up with fresh oil for when we put it back together. For most climates, the spec oil for this car is this Mobil 1 0W20. This is the only brand of 0W20 I've ever seen, so I assume this is what they intend. But yeah, this is what I use in my car, and it's fine, perfectly acceptable, meets the spec. So we go ahead and we fill this up. It actually takes quite a bit to fill this all the way up. Okay, there it is. That's pretty close to full. All right, once you get the oil filter put back together and filled up with oil, you take it and you stick it in its bore, and you just turn it till it goes home. Okay. Then you get a torque wrench and you tighten it to 30 foot-pounds. Right there. This guy, remember this is a separate piece, gets tightened to 9 foot-pounds. Alright, so here's our drain plug. As you can see, it has this copper washer on it that these are supposed to be a one-time use thing. Actually, the stock ones are aluminum. Look like this. This is an aluminum washer that acts as a gasket for our drain plug. Now, these are supposed to be a one-time use kind of deal. So you use it once, and every time you change the oil, you replace it. However, in the past, I've had perfectly fine luck reusing them a couple of times. So if you don't have one of these, or you can't get it for some reason, and you just need to reuse the old one, it's okay. Reuse the old one, or whatever was on there, as long as it wasn't leaking, and it'll probably be all right. But I happen to have the real deal aluminum type, so we go ahead and put that on there. So we stick our plug into the hole. We turn it to the left, as if we're loosening it, until you feel it settle into the hole. Use your hand to turn it forward a little. Once you get it going where it's not cockeyed in the hole, go ahead and run it down with your hand until it stops. Tighten it with a torque wrench. And we're going to tighten that to 18 foot-pounds, about right there. So now we wipe the oil off the bottom of our engine, refill. Alright, so we remove our filler cap, we put a funnel in there, and we start filling up our oil pan. You should be able to get about 3.5 quarts in there. Here's another. And our final quart, which should put us right about up at full. If we look at it like this, we can see, at least I can see, that it's pretty much all the way full. So we're going to say that's good. We've got a hair left over in our last quart. And then put your oil cap back on here. So now that we've filled the engine up, we need to take just a minute and get under here and make sure that we're not leaking oil anywhere. So we check our drain plug here, we check our oil filter drain cap, and around the edge of the oil filter. And those all look dry. So we're good down here. That means we can pull our drain pan out, reposition our jack stand, and then we're ready to rotate the tires and take it down off the jacks. Now that we have that done, we can move on to a much less messy part of the job, which is to rotate the tires. So in order to do that, we have to get all 4 wheels off of the car. So we'll start by removing these plastic covers. And forward. And now we put the wheels back on. This was just the left rear, and this is the left front. So we go left rear to left front. I should note that the tire rotation pattern depends on what type of tires you have. There are some tires, although I doubt that they're very common on IQs, that are directional, which means that you can't swap the tires from side to side. So the way that our rotation would typically work is that you swap the 2 fronts side to side and then move them to the rear. And then you move the rears straight up to the front. But when you swap them side to side, the direction they rotate reverses. So if you have the type of tires, and they'll say somewhere here on the sidewall, direction of rotation if that's an issue. If you have the type of tires that require that they rotate in one specific direction, you just rotate them front to back. So these stock tires are perfectly fine to rotate side to side. But if you have aftermarket performance tires, or if you have that optional wheel package that may have come with different tires, you should check on those before you do rotating them side to side. Because in the case of directional tires, the direction does matter. Now on goes what was our right front, now our left rear. And here's our right rear, was our left front. And finally our right front, which was just our right rear. Before we take the car down off the jack stands, we should look underneath and make sure we didn't leave any tools of the drain pan or anything under there. So we're good to take it down off the jack stands now. torque wrench to tighten these to 80 foot-pounds. Once you get your lug nuts torqued, you can put your wheel covers back on here. There's one. At this point, we need to put the oil in a jug for disposal and put our tools away. And then we're done. One last step. Yeah, I know you're unhappy. One last step before we're all done is to make sure that when we start the engine, our oil light, this one right here, goes out once the engine gets running. So we checked for leaks, we checked the engine had oil in it, we go ahead and turn the key. And there it is. Our oil light's out. We listen to the engine. We don't hear any weird knocking or tapping or anything. So there we go. We're all done. Now it's just a matter of shutting the hood and putting the car away. Alright guys, that's all there is to it. With any luck, the car should be good for another year. Obviously you should keep an eye on things like your fluid levels and your tire pressures and the condition of your light bulbs, but barring any unforeseen failures of anything, this is all you should actually have to do to the car, other than maybe sometimes adding a little bit of oil. Remember, this engine is notorious for burning oil, and although mine doesn't, apparently a lot of them do. So keep that in mind and keep an eye on your fluid levels, but otherwise, you should be good. So, if you came here looking for mechanical advice or help maintaining your own IQ, I hope this helped you out, and if you just wanted to see me get my hands dirty, I hope you were entertained, and as always, I will see you in the next one.